Hiya folks, Gord Pyzer here for Northeastern Ontario Tourism, and I want to talk about ice fishing for the glamour species. And the glamour species in winter is probably lake trout, and Northeastern Ontario offers some of the best lake trout fishing found anywhere in North America. Now, there's real popular lakes, real well-known marquee waters like Lake Temagami, but in the North Bay, Sudbury, Temagami areas, there are hundreds and hundreds of lake trout lakes. And I'm going to tell you a little trick today that most folks don't think about and they don't incorporate when they go out lake trout fishing in the wintertime. You're allowed 2 lines. Everybody knows that. You're allowed 2 lines, and you should always take advantage in the wintertime of using your 2 lines. But what most folks do when they set that second line out for lake trout, they tend to always use live bait. I'm going to tell you something, and it's going to shock you. Most days, the bait that we put out in our second line is the same bait that we're jigging. It could be a hard-bodied Williams spoon, it could be a lipless crankbait, it could be a tube jig, but we dead bait, we set as our set bait the same lures that we're jigging. So we'll have 2 lines and there'll be 2 jigging rods. Let me get a couple of the baits here and I'll talk about them a little more. Now, I've grabbed a couple of other baits here, probably our 3 most favorite lures that we use in the wintertime. One is a lipless crankbait. This happens to be a Kamuki Smartfish, and you can see how well chewed up it is. So we'll jig that quite aggressively for lake trout. The other bait, probably the Canadian standard, is a spoon, and this happens to be a Williams Light. And so between the Williams Light and the Kamuki Smartfish and a white tube jig, believe it or not, I think those are the only 3 baits you ever need to take when you go ice fishing for lake trout in the winter. Now, when you set that second line, here's the key. You know that those are great jigging baits. When you so you jig, now I'm working 1 hole and I'm finished, I want to go to my second hole. What I will do is take that, instead of using a live minnow, I'll just take that lure, that same rod, I put it in a rod holder. I'm going to show you the rod holder that I do prefer, but you can use any one that you like. Put it in a rod holder, and then move to your second hole. So what I'll do is I'll often have maybe 1 rod set with a tube, another rod set with a Williams spoon, or a lipless crankbait like the Kamuki, and I'll simply walk back and forth. I might have 20, 30 drilled. But I'll keep my 2 rods, and I keep just interspersing them amongst the 20, 30 holes that I've got drilled in the ice. It's the same bait that I'm jigging with. And now you're going to think, there's no way a trout's going to come up and hit a piece of metal that's just hanging in the water column. I cannot tell you the number of times in the course of a day, 80, 90% of the fish that I've caught have come on that hard bait hanging in the hole. Now, here's the key. Lake trout lakes. Here in Northeastern Ontario, and places like Lake Temagami, all of our lake trout lakes in Ontario are generally clear, super clear water. So those trout are coming through and they spot your bait at a distance. Now, a trout can't come up and feel the bait. It can't say, is this hard or soft? It can't say, is it metal or plastic? There's only one way a lake trout can test your bait, and that's put it in its mouth. And so it's coming through the water column, and it spots in the middle of the water column or down towards the bottom. It spots your bait, like the Williams spoon here or the Kamuki. It's hanging, or my white tube jig, and it looks like a Cisco. It looks like a smelt. It looks like an emerald shiner or a yellow perch. And it sees it, and instinctively, it comes right up to that bait and it hits it. I cannot tell you how many times. I used to wrap my line, I used to wrap it around my stool, so I'd have 2 stools, and I'd wrap my line, I'd jig 1 line, then let it sit dead stick. I cannot tell you the number of times I have watched my stool go running, sliding across the ice as a lake trout pulled it all the way to the hole and started to pull it down. They see it, we look at it, we instinctively think, well, that's a piece of plastic or that's a piece of metal. Lake trout's not going to hit that. At a distance in clear water, a lake trout's going to come rushing in and cream it. And if you've got super sharp hooks, it cannot shake it. You go running over, set the hook. Here's the other thing, and this is amazing. Most of your hits are going to come, so you work the bait, you've been jigging that hole, and now you put your rod in a rod holder. That bait will take 2-3 minutes just slowly unraveling, and so it's moving. The other thing that happens, there's currents underneath the ice, so there's moving water. Even though we don't think it's moving, there's subtle currents underneath the water, and your bait is always moving ever so gently, and it's that movement that turns the trout on. Now, I'm going to show you one last thing here, and it's the rod holders that I use, and instinctively, again, you can check your baits, you can see them at a distance, you can see when a fish hits. So let me go grab them and I'll show you. Alrighty, what I've done, I've jigged that other hole 5-10 minutes or so, and that's what I like to do. Work a spot for about 5 minutes, and as I say, I'll drill sometimes 10-15 holes, spread them out in a good distance, and then I'll work from one to the other, and I keep testing them all. Now, I've got that one set up, my other jigging spot. I've put the same Williams spoon or tube jig or whatever down the hole, and I come up to this one. Now I'm going to work this for 5 minutes or so, put it down. But here's the key. When I finish jigging, I take a setup. This happens to be one of the HT ice rigger holders, and it's nothing more than a tip up, if you will. You put your line in the alligator clip and then set it up and then put your rod in it. And then when a fish hits, when a lake trout hits, your line goes off, you see the flag fly, and you go running. The key, folks, the absolute key is that you do not need live bait. I have had so many fish hit the hot jigging bait, and that's the key. If you've determined that the best bait of the day is a spoon or a lipless crankbait or a tube, why go set a minnow up? Why set a little tiny minnow when this is the hot bait of the day? So you give this a try this year. Next time you go lake trout fishing, think dead baits, hard plastics, soft plastics, and metal spoons. Forget about the minnows. You set them in the middle of the water column. You're going to watch your stool go running right across the lake, and you're going to go chasing after it and maybe catch the fish of a lifetime right here in Northeastern Ontario.